Hello guys, and welcome to the very last chapter of this making of. I hope you liked the previous chapters. Here we're gonna have like one final look of the scene, and we're gonna talk about how everything came together, and as well as how I lit and shaded the scene, and a little bit of post-processing in Photoshop. So this is the final scene, and if I go to my perspective camera, this is how it looks like if I zoom in all the way up. So if I go in here, and you can see that these are still pretty high-res models. And of course, like, this building is so far back you don't really see any of it, so I kind of designed a section of it and I tiled it down and added a little bit of satellite dishes and stairs and stuff like that to break up the composition. And this building here is just the same as this one, just instanced. But let's go back here and look at some of the details. So here are the decimated meshes that came from ZBrush for the sidewalk, and some like random trash models. And here is that beer crate rather, I should say, and some random sci-fi-ish looking consoles connected to the electric grid for whatever these sci-fi people of Dublin are doing with it, and some logos and stuff. And this is a lamppost that I created after I did the one with all the details that we did in the previous chapter. I realized that for my scene I needed them to be slightly higher. So I originally think this one was like up to here or something, so I kind of extended it up a little bit. And if you see if we go to the final version of that guy, see, it's pretty much stayed the same. The only thing I did is I extended this part along with the wires. So that is that. This was also remained pretty much the same. I only added a little bit of construction pieces to kind of look like this thing is holding the building or something. And of course some lights. And believe it or not, I even went in and added all these little clips that hold the wires that go around the buildings. And here is this little guy. And the very first bar that was supposed to be over here ended up way down here. Here is that circular window. Also same treatment. A marvelous designer simulated shirt just randomly hanging around on the sidewalk. Here's the drone, the police drone. And yeah, I mean, you pretty much saw how I modeled most of this stuff. I like for some of the simple stuff like the tubes and the ventilation shafts. I didn't really do a video because it's like, if you know how to model, this, you definitely know how to model something like this. So it was just a matter of grabbing a reference and modeling it basically. But yeah, a lot of details were added, like little pebble stones and like bottles of water, random boxes with stuff inside, like pizza boxes. I mean, it's next to the pizza place, of course. For this hologram, I actually modeled the entire logo in 3D so I can make it render and look like like a hologram. And this is also a decimated piece from ZBrush. And yeah, very simple construction models to kind of support and reinforce some of these pipes going around. So yeah, I mean, that was pretty much how the scene was assembled. Like at the end of of the day, it comes down to pretty much putting the time in the work and getting it done. There's no way around it. Like if you want to make something complicated like this, you're bound to spend a lot of hours on it. So just keep the energy up and the patience, and just keep working on whatever you guys started doing, and I'm definitely sure that it's gonna end up looking really, really good at the end. So if I show the lights, you're gonna see that there's a boatload of lights. To be specific, I have 242 lights, and that is because I pretty much chose to light the scene as a painting. So it was supposed to look like it was supposed to look art directed from a specific camera. So look, some of these lights, like if you see one of these big lights, these are fog lights only, so they emit very low of intensity of actual light, but they emit a lot of fog to give a lot of depth, because there's nothing between these buildings. So having that atmospheric fog really helped sell the idea of depth. A lot of these big lights are pretty much fog cast lights. The main fill light comes from a dome light, and an HDRI map, and but I have that one on very low intensity because I only wanted a slight excuse me, I only wanted a slight fill light, so the scene is not like completely dark. And all the other lights are basically faking light coming out of a source. For example, here I have a yellow light modeled, which means this light is obviously light yellow emitting up. So yeah, all of these lights, basically all of these physically modeled lights have a real light, and of course some of them have like bounce light here and there, just to kind of emphasize some of the details. And some of these guys, let me see if I can find them. Some of these guys inside, yeah, this is like a huge light, but the intensity is not that strong. Like intensity of this is set to 1, and if you know the intensity of a light in Redshift by default, I believe is something like a 10 or something like that, or like even more than that. Actually, let me confirm that. Physical light. So the default intensity is actually 100, and I toned that down to 1 because I only wanted to to have like some sort of light coming from within the pizza place, the DeFontaine's pizza place. So yeah, I mean, obviously these are lights for a specific reason, and if you start counting, they add up pretty quickly. But the logic behind it is very, very simple. You have a blue neon sign, you add blue light next to it. You have a yellow street light, you add a yellow bounce light next to it, and so on and so forth until you cover the entire scene. Here, for example, I have a lot of blue LED lights, so I added all of these small blue lights to kind of reinforce that sci-fi feel. So yeah, that's pretty much the lighting. It looks really complex from a distance, like when you see like 240 lights, are like hot damn. But if you like really break it down, it's very, very simple logic. Everywhere you have emissive surface or a neon sign or something like that, or a physical light, then you add a redshift light to reinforce that. And the reason why I added all these lights and I didn't rely only on emissive materials is because when you render the fog pass, like the fog layer, you have a mixture of different lights within the fog pass, which is very useful for compositing later on. Because if you only have a purple neon sign, for example, there would not be a purple cast in the fog path. So that's why you would add a purple area light next to to the neon sign, for example, of this bar over here. So I have a light coming from the inside, which is purple, and that kind of helps reinforce the fog that is going to be emitting around these. So if I jump to Hypershade to look at some of the materials, like I have a lot of materials, but not that much. Like I have 3 or 4 metals, couple of concrete pieces, and couple of custom textures, but a lot of objects are sharing the same materials. So if I isolate, let's say I'm gonna grab this piece and the lamppost, like that fancy lamppost we modeled, which is a traffic light in the same time, they have the same shader, which is this green shader. So if I move this up to break it down, so what I have is, think about it as if you were in Painter, let's say substance products, substance designer or Painter. You would have a base layer of the material that the object is created, let's say a metal, and then you have a coat, which is the paint, and then you have a blend mask that is gonna blend between the two. So that is essentially what I have here. I have a reflective chrome, which is what I call this metal material, and then if I move this out of the way, and then I have a coat layer, which is a green metallic paint. And the way I make the green metallic paint is very, very simple. I have just a simple diffuse texture, which, let me see if this thing can preview it. Yes, so it's a simple diffuse metal texture, which is stylable. So I am tiling it. Actually, this one I'm not tiling. Yeah, but anyways, that's why I have all the nodes connected to one place to the texture node. So if I want to tile the diffuse, metal, roughness, all the maps, I can just tile them from one node. And then I have the same texture going into the remap value node, which basically converts it to a black and white image, and that goes into the roughness. And then I have a normal map generated from this one, which is very simple to do using stuff like in NVIDIA normal map filter, or Substance. What was that Substance program called? They have for B2M material, something like that, where you can input one map and it's going to generate a normal displacement, bump, and stuff like that. So I can't remember what method that I used, but I basically created a normal map based on the tileable color map, and that's pretty much my code. And then the metalness, the Fresnel type is set to metalness, and I pretty much tinted it a little bit green to get the metallic tint, and I played around with the metalness slider until I was happy with the look. The chrome is pretty much similar fashion. Instead of using maps here, I'm using Maya's procedural fractal noises. So I have one fractal that goes into the diffuse and into the reflective color, and then another fractal reversed goes into the roughness. And that is very, very subtle. Like this, the reverse fractal, you can only see on objects that are very close to the camera. But for like this metal cylindrical pipes, they do use this reflective chrome material. You can kind of see a little bit of breakup, which is always nice. So these two materials go into a blend material. So the chrome is on top and the coat is on the bottom, and then into the blend color I have a ramp, and that ramp is set to linear, and inside that ramp I have a redshift curvature node set to convex. Which means it's going to pick up only the edges. This is basically an edge detection node. Like think about it like if you're in Substance Painter and you add the edge detection mask. That's pretty much it. And then to break up the linear feel of that node, because the edge detect will isolate all the edges. And that's why I have this plugged into a ramp, because the ramp serves me as pretty much serves me as levels. So if I crank this up or down, I'm pretty much clipping the effect of the edge detect, or I'm softening it if I dial it down, or I can even invert it if I want to, just by flipping the ramp. And then to break the edges inside into the contrast value, I have a remap value node with the noise. Like I can totally bypass this one and just connect it like this, but I always want to add a color correction, or a value rather, correction node in between nodes. So if I want to clip or exaggerate some stuff, it's very, very easy to do so. So this thing and the ramp are pretty much utility nodes that are very optional to add. You can always connect just the curvature into the blend if you want to skip the ramp, but it's something that I like doing because it just makes my whole thing more modular and procedural. So, and like that's pretty much how I did most of the textures. Like if I grab the tiles, very similar fashion, blend color, one texture, combined with another texture going into the roughness, and then just a simple diffuse going into the diffuse and normal slots accordingly. So yeah, I mean, when you're building a scene of this scale, texturing each object separately, it's a pretty much impossible task, because it's gonna take you forever to do, and you know, in the end, it's not even worth it, to be honest, unless it's a piece where the camera is gonna go, you know, up close like this, and it's gonna go through every, you know, inch of your render. It's like a moving camera animation stuff, something like that. Never, you know, you're never gonna justify the time you're gonna spend, you know, texturing and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, doing stuff procedurally, it's always good and very, very fast. And plus, once you make you know, a library of these shaders, you can pretty much use them in every scene you have in the future. So that was pretty much the lighting and the shading part. And when I was done with this, I'm going to show you my final render settings. I rendered everything in 4K. So, and my minimum maximum samples were 16 and 256 with the threshold of 0.08. And I'm using only brute force GI with 1024 brute force rays. So that was pretty much it. And for the AOVs, I have just a couple of them. I have a ZDepth, GI raw. This one is extra. I have emission, normals, reflection, refractions, and volume. So these are pretty much you know, the standard passes you would have for compositing. I did rendered. I believe I rendered refraction as well. Yes, I have another scene where I rendered. I forgot to render the ZDepth pass. Actually, that was added, and a refraction. So, oh, actually, I do have them. Okay, there they are. So I have a refraction pass as well, which helps with all the windows and all the, you know, refractive surfaces. So when everything was rendered, I rendered everything in a single EXR file, and, you know, just for, you know, for simple, for simple compositing, you know, it's always easier to have everything in one file. And in softwares like Nuke, you can very easily shuffle all the channels out. So that's pretty much what I did. If I go to Photoshop, I don't want to start Nuke here because it's gonna bottleneck my computer with having Photoshop and Maya and, you know, all this kind of stuff in Camtasia open. So pretty much I'm gonna show you here. The composite in Nuke was very, very simple. So all I did is I took, this is my master layer, and I pretty much took a shuffle node and I connected it to it, and I shuffled and I duplicated it a bunch of times, and I shuffled all the channels. Like this would be my diffuse, reflection, refraction, GI, blah blah blah. All of them are shuffled in these, and then I have a merge node, so I can connect each of them together, you know, into you know, a single composite. And then, because I told you I forgot to render the ZDepth in the first go, I have this separate one which is only extracting the ZDepth, and I'm using that twice, as you can see, because I'm using it once as a ZDepth, meaning as a Z defocus to add depth of field, and I'm using it again to reinforce the fog in the background, to add a little bit of a clipping and glow to the fog in the background. So, and then at the very end, this orange, these three blue nodes are color correction to get this kind of look. So I try to keep my composites very, very simple as I can. I don't go crazy in Nuke because I do go in Photoshop after this, and I do a little bit of a paint over and touch up of my render and the final color correction. So if I jump to that file, this is pretty much the final render. So well, here you can see all my little clips for the wires. Like if you really go in detail, you're gonna see, you know, all the work that went into making this. And I will disable all of these just to show you what came out of Nuke. So this was the final render coming out of Maya. So if I open up the comp folder in Photoshop, from here to here, this is, well, not all that. Let me just disable all this. So from here to here, this is the difference between raw render, Nuke composite. So as you can see, everything is pretty much the same. I just added the fog and the color correction and a little bit of vignetting, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the render looks pretty much the same. And then this Molly sign was glowing a bit too much for me, so I kind of added these two nodes, or rather three nodes. One of them is a hue saturation, which is basically desaturating it a little bit, and then the other one is just darkening it slightly. So then all of these hologram pieces needed a little bit more work to, you know, kind of stand out a little bit and be more holographic like. So I have the holographic effects folder. So if I add, the first one is very, very subtle. It's just adding the you know, the famous bad TV effect. It's famous with the Blade Runner, old Blade Runner movies. And then the next layer is adding the beams, which kind of makes it look like a hologram a little bit. And how that was done is pretty much just a colorful blue noise map with a motion blur effect enabled, and that it made the whole thing stretch. And then I cropped it and I added a glow, and I set it on screen or add, depending on the layer, and that added this blue streak look. And moving along, this place felt a little bit too empty, so I kind of added one more hologram here. And then also this wall here looked like, I do have a lot of details on it, but because of how this thing was lit, it was a lot of the details were getting lost. So I pretty much took a graffiti and I warped it in place, and then I added a brightness contrast node to kind of blend it in and make it look like it's part of the render. And I did that a bunch of times with different stuff, like this air condition unit. I added a graffiti. I think it's one on the tiles here as well, if you zoom in here. So, and I have one down here. And that is just color correcting that one. and then I realized that I forgot to put the name, like a beer brand, on this beer crate. So I did that, and then added some color correction on both of them, and that was pretty much the final matte paints, quote unquote, for the render. Just adding a little bit of detail that was, you know, rushed or overlooked into the texturing process. And then this is pretty much a stock footage of smoke elements, masked and just added on top. And also this streak effect was also added in this. So this red volume effect was rendered from Redshift, and this one and the one in the back. But I felt like it's not enough, and it's like kind of it was not looking like that it's scanning something. It looked more like this guy is emitting fog. So I added this kind of stuff to reinforce that feel. Like I even added like a dotted diamond pattern to look like it's projecting something onto the objects. I kept it very loose because you don't want it to be distracting because it's so close into the render, but if you look for it, you'll see it. And then in the very end, doing a little bit of reflection correction. So I took the reflection pass and I brought it in, and I set it to add, linear dodge add, and I painted the mask to kind of lift up some of the areas, like the drone, the police drone was getting a little bit lost, so I kind of lifted it up a little bit. Same here with this logos and all the glowing elements. I felt like they can be a little bit more bright. And then last but not least, I added a chromatic aberration, which is so subtle that you really need to be zoomed in order to see it. Like if you check this edge, you can barely notice it. And that was faked very, very easily. So I took the entire comp that I had so far, I merged it into one layer, and I duplicated it 3 times, and for each of them I did a double click, I went to the layer style, and I disabled one of the channels. So the first one has only the red channel visible, the second one has only the green channel, and that's why they're named accordingly. And then all I did is I took the red channel and shifted it slightly to the left, like the entire layer, shifted it slightly to the left, the green channel slightly top, and the blue slightly right, and that gave me that interesting anomaly, glass anomaly. And at the very, very end, I decided to add in this little area here and this building, I decided to add a little bit more interest into the concrete because as I mentioned, I was using a tileable texture and I was not getting the details that I wanted. So if I enable the detailed layer, you're gonna see it's just a little bit more grungy, more, it has a bit more texture to it. So if I disable it or enable it, you can kind of see. And to wrap everything up, I just added a touch of film grain or noise. So if I zoom in here, you can see with and without. And that was pretty much the final render. It was a really big challenge, and it was a really big learning experience for me. I've never attempted to do anything this crazy in 3 weeks, and I'm so glad I did, because I did learn a lot of stuff. I made quite a few mistakes, and it was a really cool experience, just to see, when you go fast and you have a deadline, how easily is to overlook some important stuff, and how to remedy all that. So it was a very valuable lesson, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something from it. And yeah, if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to post them into the comment section, or send me a message or email. And in the end, I just wanted to show you a black and white version of this. Yeah, I just think it looks cool. Everything looks cool in black and white. It looks more realistic. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in my next tutorial. Bye.